All right. I'm going to put the agenda and a link to the slides. There are not very many of them today, but you can still have a link to them and put it in the chat. And here we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. I am the Scrum Master for PatternFly, and I welcome you to this month's PatternFly community meeting. I had someone this week ask me when I asked them to present what exactly they needed to present and what the purpose of the meeting was, who's the audience. And I thought as I was thinking about my answer, I thought it would be something that'd be worth reiterating here since I haven't done that in a while. This is the community meeting. So PatternFly is an open source project, and it is built and maintained most heavily by people who work at Red Hat, and even more so people who work on the UXD team at Red Hat. But we're not the only people who use it. It being open source, there are people all over the world who use PatternFly and are doing very interesting things with it. And even the people at Red Hat are doing interesting things with it all the time. So this meeting is an opportunity just for the community to gather, share what kinds of things we're working on, what's coming up, what's being developed in PatternFly, but also what interesting things people are using PatternFly to do. So if you ever think that you have something that you'd love feedback on, or just would love to show off, or proof of concepts or dreams about PatternFly, this is a great place to talk about it. So that's just a reminder for why we're here. And we have a few interesting presentations today. What I'm going to do is I'm recording this meeting, and I will upload the recording to YouTube and send it out to the PatternFly mailing list at the end, along with all the links discussed. So if you're not subscribed to the mailing list, you can reach out in the chat. We can send you a link to do that, or yeah, just do it. We don't send a lot of mail over the PatternFly mailing list, but you'll get announcements, major announcements when we have releases. You'll get reminders for the community meeting and a few other important news briefings related to PatternFly, but it shouldn't clutter your mailbox too much. All right, so let's see. Today, the first presentation we have is about a log viewer. It's going to be demoed by Juntao.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm Juntao, and today I'd like to give a presentation about the log viewer. This is the PatternFly extension, so let me share my screen. Okay, so now on PatternFly website, if you go to extensions, you can find log viewer just right there. And the log viewer is built on a package named Rect Window, which brings the virtualized feature of the log viewer. So it's totally virtualized, which means that it will only render the logs inside the window. So if you are considering to log something or output some logs, you may consider this extension because it's highly performance and also scalable because it will only render. So it will only render the logs inside the window. So if you scroll it, it's very fast. And what's more, we also building dark theme of it, so you can change it to dark theme to make it more like the logs, like the terminal style. And also, we have built-in search input here. And if you want to search something in your log like fail, I can see what's the failure here, like the logs. And you can go down. It will automatically focus on the log in the center and go back and search another thing. And also you can set the toolbar here and any kind of toolbar you want to set as a toolbar item. And also, so let's go through the props of the log viewer. So the first thing is that you can pass the data into it. Currently, it only support like string. You need to use the new line / n between the string to change the lines. But in the future, we could support like string array or something. And the folder, so you can add like folder here, jump to the bottom, and you click to it, it just jump to the bottom. So it's very easy. And has line numbers, it's better to show line numbers because you can see some logs that don't have line numbers and some has line numbers. And has toolbar is the same. And header, you can set a banner here to show how many lines you have. And height in a ref. So in a ref, it's just like a reference to the log viewer component, so that you can directly operate the component, deal with the component. And the item count, loading content on scroll. So there are many of it. The one I want to mention about is like on scroll. This is very useful. This is very useful callback function that you can use here. For example, if you go to our demo, you can see a demo here. It's recording logs. And you can set any scroll function, callback function here you want. For example, if I scroll up, it will automatically post. You can see the log is paused. And if I scroll down to the bottom, it will continue logging. So it's just like this. And in the future, we may support NC color, NC escape color, NC escape code. So if it detects like NC escape code in the log, it can render new span, like add a background color or foreground color on the log to make it better. And that's all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juntao. I know it's been a lot of work to create this virtualized log viewer, and you've done some good stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, Joachim's going to show us some work he's been doing on a UI builder for PatternFly.
Yep. Hi. So I'm happy to share my progress over a bit of a POC project / Hacktoberfest project. Essentially, it's like a Lego toolkit for PatternFly. So if you want to play around with it, please feel free to do so. It's under pf-ui-builder.search.sh. So when you get in here, this is the interface that you're currently greeted with. And on the left-hand side, you have like most of the components. I haven't implemented all of the components, but most of the PatternFly components. And this is, by the way, tied to this release. I think this is the last release that went out recently. So it's 2021.13. If you click on it, it brings you to the release notes for this release. And there are a lot of things you can do. For example, if I look at the, let's say the alert, I can drag and drop. And this might be hard to see over screen share, but I'm dragging and dropping this list item over into the area on the right. And you can see that I can now drop it. And it puts the alert component inside of this area. And I also have other things for the alert component, like this alert action close button and this alert action link. I provide some tooltips that tell you where it should be added to. And in this case, it's also being added as a prop to the alert component. And as you start to drag these items, you can see some kind of visual indicator as to where those things should be dragged onto. So in this case, it wants to be dragged onto an alert item. So once I let go, you can see that it added a close button on the right. Similar, I can drop a link. And of course, we've got the code editor on the right, so I can make changes here. And it will be reflected within the preview panel. I mentioned preview panel because, as you can see, there are like a lot of borders. That's just to facilitate the whole like nesting of components. But of course, you can also switch over to, sorry, I was in the layout mode, and you can switch over to the preview mode, which basically shows you the way that the component would actually be rendered out. So you can switch between the two perspectives. There are a ton of components right now, so you can, avatars, badges, basically, like I said, most of the components are available. There are also layouts, which you can see here. So I have like a stack layout, and I can drop some stack items onto it. And again, as I drag and drop, it gets a visual indicator, and then I can choose from more components. For example, for like the card component, you can see that all of these are grayed out, which means that there's some requirement that these need. I don't block users right now from actually still using them, but it's just like a visual indicator that you probably don't want to drop these items. In this case, it wants to be placed within a card item. So once I drag the card item over, in this case, into the stack item, you can see that all of the relevant items that can be dragged into the card component now are enabled. Card actions is still not enabled because it wants to live inside of a card header. So once I drag a card header into the card, then card actions is enabled, and I can drag that in here. There are a couple more UI elements here. You can switch toggle between a dark theme and a light theme. I enjoy the dark theme. There are different templates you can choose from. Right now, there are just 3 ones to start off with. So you can click on basic page, which just reloads the entire thing with just like a basic page template. I also have like a more full-featured full page template, which as of now is still using the old page, I think the page header section instead of the new Masthead. So I'm going to make that update soon. But you can see that this is more of a full-featured page layout example, which gives you a good starting point. If I want to drag it, drop down in somewhere, I can just add that. And again, if I switch over to the preview mode, you can see how this would look like. And then there's one more template right now, which is just like this drawer template. I do also, I wanted to facilitate code sharing. Right now, I don't have a backend, so I'm just using Gist right now. So what you can do is, once you make your example, you can use this export to Gist button. You just give it a description. You create. And then this way, it would give you like a copyable link. If you wanted to, you can open up the URL as well, which brings you to that gist. And then, if you were to share that URL with somebody else who's using the code builder, let's say they're like, a new template, they can use this import button, and then they would just paste that link and import. And then this way, it would bring in whatever you had created over into their space. And then lastly, there's also an export to Code Sandbox. So when you click on this button, it's going to, as the name says, it's going to export whatever you create over in the Code Sandbox. And in this way, you can also share it out and start playing it in the Code Sandbox environment. And there's also a feedback button here. Like this is kind of still an alpha status, so there's probably going to be a lot of bugs. But if you have any feedback, please click on this link, which brings you over to the project's repo. And if you have any additional feedback, even if you like it or if you don't like it, or if you'd like to see something else, I'd love to hear about it. There's also a VS Code extension in the works, which I can show real quick. Let me just stop presenting this and share my VS Code source builder, which will also be released pretty soon. Oh, actually, that's the source code. 1 second. A window extension, I think it's this one. And the great thing is that if you go to PatternFly.org, you can actually copy most of the example code pieces that are there and paste it in. So for example, I'm like on, you don't see this because I'm only sharing VS Code, but I am on PatternFly.org, and I went to the chip group components, and I'm just going to drag and drop that code into my VS Code editor. So I just copied over the code here, and then there's an extension for VS Code. It's called the UI Builder. And the way I would run it is I would have the file open that I operate on, and I execute the UI Builder command, which is also going to bring up the same interface that you saw within VS Code. So it opens up this VS Code panel. And if I just make this a little bit wider, you can see there's the there's the like a list of components. And if I make changes over in the VS Code panel, it would reflect also after saving. So now it says chip 2 over here. So this is something else that's in the works that will probably be released pretty soon too. If you want to work with code locally and be able to make changes to your code, you know, basically prototyping pretty quickly using this extension, it saves directly to disk. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Yes, so cool. All right, now we're going to move to an update for some of the newest enhancements added to our PatternFly core repository, presented by Michael.
Hey, thanks. I'll share my screen. Okay. Okay, super. So first up, it looks like the list is in alphabetical order, so that's pretty amazing. We have to the banner component, which is a relatively newer-ish component. We've added support for links because each banner has we have different status colors that are used as a background color for it, and our traditional link colors don't work across the usage of the different background colors. And so we just did a little study and tried to come up with something that would work for links when you're using that in a banner. And so you can see this here in the banner component, banner with links, see a bunch of disabled links, inline link buttons. So we support any anchor element that you use as a traditional link. Also the button component, if you're using an inline link, we style that to work in the different variations of the banner component too. And next, we have a new drag and drop component. It's the way that it's built is kind of agnostic to what it's where it's used. It's basically just a bunch of styles that come from core that can be applied to a drag and drop implementation. And then we are using that drag and drop. There's a drag and drop library in React that pulls in these styles, and that's what we get with our drag and drop in our components. And so we basically have, it consists of two subcomponents called draggable and droppable. And pretty simple. So you can drag a draggable thing, and you can drop a draggable thing into a droppable thing. And so we have a few examples here where these are all draggable things. This is a draggable thing being dragged over a droppable thing. You get a little subtle overlay of the thing in the background to lighten the content inside of it, to draw prominence to the draggable item on top. You get a box shadow around the draggable thing. You get a border around the droppable thing if you're within the droppable zone. And then if you are dragging a draggable thing over a droppable thing that doesn't accept your draggable thing, then you get this red border and red treatment around both the draggable and droppable things to say, hey, you can't drop that here, so drag it elsewhere, please. And then, yeah, so that's pretty simple. Dual list selector now supports disabled items. So you can see this, there's a disabled item here in our basic example. There may be other disabled. No, I think it's just that one. And then underneath the tree view dual list selector, you can see that you can disable an entire tree too. So you can see that there. So single items or tree items. And then next, with the really cool menu component, we have introduced a scrollable variation. So the menu was previously scrollable, like you could do this kind of thing in a menu, but you just did it by setting a variable, a CSS custom property that defines a max height for your menu. And if you define that, then we set the overflow and all that kind of stuff to the menu so that you can scroll the content. However, there's some other stuff that we want to potentially do with the menu component when you're using it in a scrollable way. And it's easier for us to control that using a CSS class as opposed to you just setting a variable. And so we've added a scrollable class that we apply to the menu when it's scrollable. And if you haven't defined that variable that was defined before, we assign that max height, just a reasonable max height. I believe it's something like 300 pixels or however tall this menu is. So you get that by default if you specify the scrollable class. And then if you want to customize the height, have it be something other than the default, then you just assign that same variable that was used to assign the max height. Assign it just like you did before, and that will give it a different max height. And you can see that actually here as this example is doing that. It's important to note that defining the max height variable still works as you would expect it to. It's just you might, I think we're treating the footer of the menu a little bit different by drawing a box shadow on it when the menu is scrollable. So you're using the scrollable class. Whereas if you haven't used the scrollable class, you don't get that box shadow on the footer because we assume that the footer is going to be static. And then also another enhancement to the menu component is a plane variation. And so this is basically the menu exists inside of its own box, like a context kind of menu thing that pops up with a box shadow. It's probably going to appear on top of other stuff. Well, if you want to use the menu in like just a regular kind of box on your page that has its own layout, it's not popping up on top of something else, you can do that. You can just use the plain variation of the menu, and then you just get this like list of stuff that you can kind of do whatever you want. And then of course you can use all the other stuff that goes in the menu, like the header, search input, footer, that kind of stuff. So and then up next with the progress stepper component, pretty small enhancement just to add helper text to these step titles. And so that would indicate rather that you have a popover or potentially a tooltip. I think it's a popover. And so we're working on that side in the React component right now, but this is just the styling that you would get when you've got help text associated with a step. And then up next, we have the select component now supports placeholder text. So similar to the form select component, which is the HTML select element, our custom select component also supports this placeholder text for when similar to a text input or something like that. It's basically describing what you're going to do with this form element, and then so you can see it here when the menu is collapsed, the text is just a little bit lighter than the regular text is. You can see an example here. This is probably the most common, where you expand the menu and the placeholder text is still shown because you haven't selected anything. As soon as you select something, that's going to replace the placeholder text. And then here's another example where when you expand the menu, you don't actually have to select an item that makes the placeholder text go away. You could also select the placeholder text again, and that would collapse the menu and you'd still have the placeholder text. In this previous example, as soon as you select something, you can't go back to the placeholder text without, say, reloading the page or something like that. So, and that's it for that one. So the next change is really awesome. Matt Nolting on our team worked on this, and it's to add sticky columns to the table, which is really cool. So we support sticky header. So you can scroll the content and keep your headers static. That was a pre-existing feature. So now you can keep a column or columns static. And we support in columns, I believe. So, and then to further blow everyone's minds, you can also scroll columns and headers in the same table. So that's pretty amazing. It's super complicated. Matt did a really great job on that. And so check that out in the core examples. And then that should be landing in React, I suppose, pretty soon. And then up last, we've got a new component we're calling text input group. And so it's effectively like our text input. So, the form input element that you'd put some form data inside of the text input. But this is it's a custom implementation of, instead of styling an input to have this like border and all this kind of stuff, it's like a bunch of divs and things that recreate what looks like a text input, and then we have a text input inside of it that doesn't have any sort of borders or anything to kind of give you this appearance. What that allows us to do that a regular text input doesn't allow us to do is to put other stuff inside of that box, like a button, because you can't put a button inside of a text input, but you can put a button inside of a bunch of divs that has a text input beside of it. And so it also allows us to do things like put a chip group inside of there for filters. And so you may have seen this pattern if you've used the multi-select type ahead variant of the custom select component. You would see how once you select items, we put chips inside of there, and you can expand and collapse the chips. And this particular component has a scrollable feature for horizontal overflow. So yeah, basically it's in its early stages, just built it this past sprint. So check that out. It's coming in the React, this upcoming React release as well, hopefully. And that's it. That's all the core updates we have today.
Thanks, Michael. I had a quick question. For the dropdown that you were displaying, I was wondering what was the value of having users selecting the placeholder text again, because it seemed as if they were selecting an actual value to search on, as opposed to like maybe clearing that entire field. Like, did we look at providing a way to clear any text input as opposed to selecting some placeholder?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would have to look at let me just look at this select component real quick. I can't remember if we have a clear button that we add. I know we added in maybe in the case of a multi-select, but I think I could say that at least in one of those instances, if the field isn't required, selecting the placeholder item would just be another way to select. That's also a common pattern that I've seen anyways in other select components or select elements, is that you can still select the item that is the placeholder text, just to say, oh, I opened this menu and I don't want any of this, or maybe I selected the wrong thing, I'll come back to it. But yeah, that's a really good question about also offering a clear button. I'll look into the select component to see if we currently support a clear button. I know that I'm trying to think. No, it would have to be. I was thinking if there would be a browser implementation for a clear button, but that would be like on a text input or something like that. Definitely not like a wouldn't transfer to this custom select that we've built. So I can look that up after this meeting and get back to you. And if that seems like something we would want to make as an enhancement to the component, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think that the type ahead select has a clear button built in, but not the general select. So I assume that's doable if it's something we wanted to add to any select, but I think right now it's only available for the type ahead.
Yep, that sounds right.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Michael.
All right, awesome. We're going to move right into React updates. And the first one actually also comes from Michael. You ready for that one, Michael? Or no?
Yeah, I kind of forgot. It can be ready in a second. Let's do this again. Let's see. It's a pretty simple update. This had come from a product request. They had a select menu. That was, let's see, did we actually, I can't remember if we added an example of it Let's see. Is it? Okay, yeah, this is it. Okay, so I don't believe that there is an example of this. Let me just, this is a really bad search. Yeah, there's not. But it's a new value for the position property of the select component, and it's the value is right. And what that does is it aligns the right edge of the select with the right edge of the menu. If you have a select component that's placed on the right edge of the viewport, by default, the select component's menu expands, and the left edge of the select component is aligned with the left edge of the menu. And so if you have a wide menu, for example, that might go wider than the select component itself, and that menu pops up on the right side of the viewport, that menu can go all outside of the viewport. And so in that case, you would want to have the menu aligned to the right edge of the select instead, so that if it's wider than the select component, it will expand out to the left. And so basically that's it. It's just an extra value for right for the position property on the select component.
All right, cool. Sorry to put you on the spot, but
Nope. That's my bad.
good explanation. All right, let's see. The next React update is from me. So let me share my screen. With the last release, we added a few new features to the dualist selector. The first is we built a composable dualist selector, which most basically exposes the inner pieces of a dualist selector so that a consumer who wants to have a dualist selector in their application can build the lists in the selector themselves, as opposed to having them being built dynamically. So for some of our pre-existing examples, the user just passes a list of options, and all of the inner workings of the dualist selector are built dynamically, which is very handy for the most basic use cases. But the more complicated the dualist selector gets, sometimes consumers like to have more control over what's being built, so or how it's being built. So we've exposed some of the inner workings and created an example where all of the child components are being used. It's a lot longer because most of the logic has to be consumer managed in that case. But if I scroll down, you can see things like the controls are the buttons in the middle, and the consumer can oh, I don't want to overuse the word, can control the different events and behaviors when those controls are interacted with, and things like that. So this might help, especially if you have very, very long lists and you want them to maybe be loaded more dynamically, because trying to render thousands of options on page load can take a long time. This might be the sort of thing that this allows you some more flexibility and give you more options for how to do things like that. So hopefully soon there'll also be a tree or an expandable example for how to build it composably. It should already be possible, but we haven't built an example to demonstrate how to wire up the logic to work the same way. So hopefully that's something coming soon. But another thing that was released recently for the dualist selector is incorporating the use of our new drag and drop component to how to reorder options in a dualist selector. With our upcoming release, we'll be exposing the API for the drag and drop component. It's in its early beta stages, and so here it's being incorporated to the dualist selector, which is also in its a beta component still. But this is us making sure that they can work together. So you see an example here. It also uses the composable structure. as this previous example. Basically wraps the various lists and panes in the appropriate draggable and droppable components that Michael was dancing through all the names of and are very confusing to try to speak out loud, so I'm not even going to try. But the API will be exposed soon for the drag and drop component on the React side, and we are very excited for people to start playing with that. So that is my update. And I'm going to pass it off to Titani next.
Hello. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I have a few updates to share. We made an update to the tabs component. We added vertical expandable tabs. So before we just had vertical tabs and they were just always displayed. And now we have an expandable option. You can see that here. Okay, in order to use that, you use the expandable prop, and you can set the expandable different breakpoints as well, so it can be responsive. So, for instance, at the medium breakpoint here, we set it to not be expandable by setting non-expandable, and by default, it's expandable. The large breakpoint here is expandable. And then the next update we made to tabs was we had an issue where vertical tabs were showing for a screen reader, it would show scroll buttons. So for non-vertical tabs, we have scroll buttons if there's overflow. But for vertical tabs, it's not applicable. So we made an update so they would not be visible for vertical tabs. So you can see that over here. And now we have the scroll buttons are disabled or hidden when we have vertical tabs. And the next update to share is with the sidebar component. This is another accessibility update where before if we had a scrollable panel, it would not be accessible via keyboard. So we added a tab index to, this is the old version. So I can show you, demonstrate here that, oops. So here you can see that it is not tabbable, it just tabs right over the panel. But with the update, we added to the example to make it tabbable was adding a tab index of 0 here. So now you can see that we can now tab and it's now accessible via keyboard. And then the last update I want to share was we added, this is our continued effort to add demos for the menu components, building up our pre-existing components. So we added an example for the options menu. So over here, this is in the demo section under composable menu. You can find this example of an options menu using the composable menu. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, I was typing in the chat. Awesome. All right, next up is Katie.
All right, let me present my screen. All right, looks like that's presenting. Hello, everyone. So first up for my updates, we have a new addition to our navigation component. We have added flyouts. So kind of similar to it'll be very similar to menu because it actually does use our menu component with different styling. So if you hover over this link 3, which has a flyout, you'll see a flyout appear. If you move the hover to a different one, it'll close. You can continue moving this, and it does the same behavior in menu where if you get towards the edge of the screen, it will actually flip directions and bounce back for this final menu. And again, you can see if you hover over some other item that's not the flyout, it'll close. But if you leave it out of the entire flyout, it'll stay open until you click off. This is created the exact same way as our menu component. So literally it's just you do the same thing you did for menu and then you pass it into nav as a container instead of just using menu altogether. Accessibility wise, this will be very similar to menu as well. I clicked the wrong button, 1 second. Scroll back down here. You could use the arrow keys just like in menu to navigate between all of these items. And you can also use so it's right arrow to open or space to open, or you can press escape to close and it'll escape down to the previous menu. I think that about summarizes it. This also gives you a nice hint just to remind yourself about the keyboard interactions here. Next update is a new component called Progress Stepper. Let me go to the React examples. This is kind of an alternative view to our progress bar, which is more of a filling bar. This is different, kind of each step is shown and has labeling around that. Kind of something you might see more in like a wizard type of use case. Each step, there's a bunch of different variants and they have default icons. So you see this first step here is the green icon and no bold text. It's a success variant, which has this green icon as its default. The second step has the current styling, which makes it bold and has this blue icon as default. Third step is a pending step, which is grayed out and has no icon by default, but all of that can be tweaked and overridden. You can add descriptions as well as titles to progress steps, so you can give a bit more context to what each step is supposed to happen. And then you can kind of customize the different kind of layouts and alignments of this component to better fit your needs. So you can do center alignment, you can do vertical alignment. These all work with descriptions as well. There's also a compact kind of variant, which does not support descriptions and will only display the title of the current step. So you still see all of the different little dots for every step. This is the exact same code as the other examples, but you don't see descriptions and you only see the second step, which is the current step. These next two examples showcase the warning variant, which is third step here with this yellow icon, and fourth step, which is this red icon and red text, kind of meant to signify a failure or a danger. This last demo shows the custom icons. So instead of having the current step in process here be that blue icon, you want to have like a loading icon, or if this pending step, you want to have like a wait icon, you can still do that. Phone, sorry. Accessibility wise for these components, to get the proper labeling, you're going to want and have to include an ID on the whole step. So like each of these little dots, you have to have an ID on, and each of the titles as well to get the proper labeling. And finally, we have a working demo with Progress Stepper. Basically, that lets you step forward or step back to kind of showcase like how this might look as you move through a wizard or another use case. This has the added benefit for accessibility. It showcases how to make this accessible and have it actually announce to the screen reader that something has changed when you press any of these buttons, or if the status of this progress stepper changes, let that announce to the screen reader. So it's not just clicking buttons and not knowing something's happened. And then I think my last update, which this covers it for Progress Stepper, last update is about table. We have a couple new demos here. So these demos showcase kind of a manual way to control sorting. So sorting has been done outside, but it's always been based on these columns. So if you like reorder this column, it will sort. But in use, when we figured out if I shrink this table, I don't know how well this is going to work. There we go. This needs to close. you can see that these tables shrink so that every single column header is with every single row for every row. And we lose the sorted icons. So you can't click on column 1 and have it sort anymore. So we needed to make an alternate method of control, which ends up being this little filter box, which could be any menu for what that's worth. So this is an example using, like, you can sort by column 1 and make it descending, and it'll change that here as well. Or you can sort by column 3 or 2, and it'll do the exact same thing as you would do as clicking on these buttons, but it's outside of the table itself, so you can actually manually control it. This feature is in both of our composable table, which is right here, as well as on this page. Our legacy table also supports this. The implementations are slightly different, but the kind of methodology is the same, to kind of control the sorting outside of the table headers. And we also have a new demo. If I scroll up here, under the React demo section, if I scroll down, we have a new full page demo to showcase this kind of responsive behavior and how you might actually see it on a page. So if I open this, you can see you have a table, you have it sorted, but when you shrink it, I'll shrink it again, then the toolbar changes and this icon appears. So like a large icon or a large action got hidden when the table was shrunk, but then this appears and lets you sort it. It's hard to tell because it's overriding the, there we go. It's overriding the overlaying the options, but you can sort it without needing those tables. So this works on small screen sizes now. And I believe this is the same page. So yes, that wraps it up for me in React.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Austin, who has a React update as well.
Yeah, so my update is, excuse me, all about some changes to page. Get my screen sharing up. And actually, well, not changes to page, but changes to the examples and demos that we have for page. We previously were using the page header component and the page header tools components, and those have now been replaced with the Masthead component and its associated subcomponents and the toolbar component. And that is being done because Masthead is more composable and it has some better responsive it's more responsive, and I have a good demonstration of that I'll show in a minute. So all of these examples have been updated to use Masthead rather than page header, with the exception of this final one, which is the same as the first example on the page, but denoted as using page header. So that for cases where page header is still in use, you have something that you can reference. But we do intend for new components, new things being built to use Masthead rather than page header. And in the demos, the two previous demos are still here. They're just denoted as using page header. And a new demo was added using Masthead, which you can see they look about the same.
Could you reshare your screen with your demo?
Thanks, Nicole.
All right, we're good now?
Yep.
Okay. So here is the new demo, and here is one of the old demos. You can see it look about the same. But one really nice thing about having Masthead is that, for example, if we go down to like an iPhone 5, we drop down and get the second part right here because of Masthead. So this is not shrinking. If we try and do the same thing using the page header component, we can see that the logo for PatternFly actually has to shrink down to be able to fit. That's one really nice thing about using Masthead here instead of using page header. And that is all that I have.
All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to pass it off to Jessie, who has a couple accessibility updates.
Hello, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you guys see this? All right, cool. So my updates are pretty short. Yeah, I see nodding, Nicole. Thank you. So I have some pretty short updates today. One of them is a pretty simple one. We basically noticed that the aria-current that was on the wizard steps seemed a little off. And aria-current basically tells the screen reader what the user is on, so what the current step they're on. You can be set to different things like page or step, and we had it set to page, which when we were testing kind of seems a little odd, and it kind of announces each of these steps as like, this is your current page. But this first step doesn't really seem appropriate to call a page. It seems a little more appropriate to call an actual step. So we changed that to step. So a pretty small update, but should hopefully help users who are using the wizard to know better where they are in the wizard. So that's the first one. And then the second one is actually something I noticed while working on another thing for Label, which hopefully I'll have more updates for you guys on the next community meeting on. But for this one, when I was testing it out for some of the work we were doing, I noticed that the aria-label seemed kind of odd for all of the default close buttons for the label. And for example, this one says label close button, and they all kind of say the same thing, which doesn't really make sense in a screen reader. They would get to that button and it would just say label close button, which isn't super clear. So we've basically updated that before they could add an aria label, but you would have to do it in kind of a funky way where you would pass it through the close button prompts and then the actual specific attribute you wanted. So we wanted something a little bit clearer. So we actually added a prop where you can kind of adjust that and added a better, more sensible default. So if you add a close button aria label prop, that will be the default, but otherwise it'll say close and whatever the title is. And so now it would say like close gray icon removable. So that would make a lot more sense to someone who's using a screen reader rather than that non-human label. And I also wanted to mention, based on the awesome discussion that I was seeing in the chat, that we are working on having an accessibility tab for documentation on each of our components. I think I've shared in a couple other community meetings, but I think it's important to keep mentioning because we're still working through it. So we have a ton of components, and to document all of them for accessibility, it takes time. But if there are certain components that you really want to know how to make that accessible or why it functions a certain way, anything like that, definitely make sure to comment on that issue or go ahead and create the issue, because some of these I have the list, but I actually haven't gone through to convert it to an issue, stuff like that. So feel free to add that, and I will prioritize that component before some of the others. But I just wanted to mention that in case there are components that you really have questions on and want more accessibility information, so that I can know to do those first, because obviously we have a lot, so there's a lot of work ahead of us. So I think that's pretty much it. Just a quick update from me.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I see Kevin wants to present about the PatternFly wireframe library, and so I'm going to have you do that. Before you start, I'm going to say we might run up to noon, and that's okay because this is a recorded meeting, and so if you need to leave, that's fine, and I will send out the recording after. And also, any questions you have, feel free to message me, or you can respond to the email or whatever, or put them in the chat between now and when we sign off. But okay, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Nicole. This should also be pretty quick. I just wanted to bring visibility to a work stream that that got kickstarted by Alessandro and Mary and some others UXDers on the team. And this is around providing a quicker way for designers to ideate on some of their work without really using these hi-fi mockups or hi-fi components. Like when we're talking about when we're working through like this very early stages in design, right, when you just want to quickly get an idea out and get some feedback on. And also, I think I'll add, when we typically present our design with full in high fidelity, they tend to be, we have audiences or customers focus on the wrong pieces. So the idea here is to provide a much more like a selector approach, right, to designing. So this is much more like I guess an additional tool for you guys to sort of leverage and take advantage of for throughout your design process. And I will say that this is definitely still in the very early stages where we're still having discussion around what should be in this framework, and how exactly we need to map those to the existing components. So we have a spreadsheet where we're working through what components we sort of need to prioritize today versus later on. Which versions of that we need to have, hi-fi, low-fi, low-fi versus mid-fi in comparison to the high fidelity version of that. So, and kind of just also give you an idea of what that sort of looks like today. This is what we're envisioning when we're talking about a lo-fi, something very, very, I guess, as I mentioned, skeletal. Takes away the imagery, takes away the logos, really focuses on the thing, on the idea. And the mid-fi version of that starts to bring in a bit more typography and some more high definition of the buttons themselves and things like that. So yeah, I wanted to share this with the team just for visibility that this is something that we're pulling together, and we're hoping to have something by the end of the year that we can share for feedback. But I think even now we would love to hear from you guys in regards to what it is that you think would be great to have in such a library. Also, in regards to the prioritization of things, what sort of components would you like us to focus on? And I can share this document also. I can add that to the agenda so you can go offline and take a look at this. But we'd love to hear from you guys and what you think and what you would like to see and what direction or shape we'd like to see this take. That's all I got.
Thank you, Kevin. I love that. I think I can already imagine even ways that we could use those kinds of images in other places too. So that's exciting. Okay, awesome. And now we'll pass it off to Matt to close us out with what we are working on. What's the future look like, the near future look like for PatternFly?
Well, I don't have my crystal ball handy, but actually, I guess I need to share my screen out first. Okay. So I know we're running over time, so I'm going to make this pretty quick. I just wanted to give a brief preview of things that we are working on currently in the PatternFly Scrum team. The design team has a few things in progress. This visual refresh is kind of a longer term issue that we're starting to think about a next generation PatternFly look and feel. We don't currently have any specific timeline for when that might be available, but we are starting to think about, this is mostly a visual thing in terms of styling updates and things like that we might want to integrate in the future. We currently are taking a deeper look at filter patterns. We get a lot of feedback on filters and a lot of complex use cases that products are trying to implement. So mostly Margot Ministro and I have been leading that charge. If you have input on that and we haven't already reached out to you, feel free to reach out to me and I can give you a more detailed update about that. We are pretty close to having finalized designs for some file upload enhancements specifically to support scenarios where you want to upload multiple files at once. Also been looking at labels. We've introduced a couple of releases ago an editable labels. So we have the capability to do that yet, but we realize we probably need some better affordances, both to make it more intuitive and for accessibility. So the design team is currently looking at that. And finally, I've been looking at a visual query builder component that would allow you to build complex Boolean queries through a graphical approach. So there's links there to those issues. Feel free to dive deeper or to comment on any of those items. Next up, the development team, both Core and React, are working on a few major features that should be coming up over the next month or two. The horizontal table scrolling, which Michael Coker demonstrated earlier in the meeting, that is going into React. So hopefully by the time of our next release, we will have a React version of that functionality. We currently are introducing some additional card styles, a non-actionable card, and what we're calling a raised card. I'll just show this briefly. So this is designed to get around the some of the focus conflicts we've had with Chrome, especially with our selectable cards. So we are introducing this as a new variant of cards and encouraging. We didn't want to break the current card grid that we have, but we are encouraging products to adopt this going forward as a more is a better way to show selectable cards. Let's see what else. Key value filtering, we're working on a demo that will leverage this new input text input group that Michael had shown for showing how that could be used in a toolbar for filtering. We still continue to work on refactoring dropdowns to be composable and introducing KD demonstrated the flyout that we recently introduced. In the future, we'll also be introducing a drill down and a tertiary expansion variants for vertical navigation to make that navigation more scalable. And then finally, we have an ongoing effort to address some tree view performance issues that have been reported back to us. Finally, just a heads up on our remaining releases for the calendar year 2021. We have a release hopefully by the end of this week, which will be 2021-14, a release in mid-November, and then our final release for the year will be before December 10th, after which we will give the team some well-deserved respite going into the holiday shutdown. So that's all I got. Any quick questions for me? Well, I think we are done.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks everybody. If you would like to present at an upcoming community meeting, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I think this was great. So I look forward to the next one, and I will send out recordings and links and all that fun stuff shortly. See you in about a month.
Thanks, Nicole.